Oh man, there you guys are. Welcome to part 6. You know, if there's a part 6, more happened or more was done to the DeLorean, and you're right. It had nothing to do with AJ, so I'm going to make sure I make a major disclaimer at the very beginning of this video. AJ and Darren did an incredible job working on the car. AJ did most of the mechanics and stuff, if not all of the mechanic stuff. AJ did a perfect job working on the DeLorean, but there was a major issue that was wrong with the DeLorean that no one could figure out. It was the craziest thing, and I think I am the only DeLorean owner that it's ever happened to. And I'd like to share that experience with you here in a minute. It took me 5 days to fix this major problem and sort of $0. So what was this major issue you're talking about? Well, it had something that no one had ever seen. It had an idling issue, and it was the craziest thing anybody had ever seen. Basically, when you would start it cold, it ran absolutely perfect. Once it warmed up, it ran perfect, but as soon as you gave it gradual throttle and let off, it would start idling really crappy. If you blip the throttle very quickly, it would idle perfect, but the minute you gave it gradual throttle again, it ran really crappy. The fuel system on a DeLorean, it's kind of complicated. It's actually very complicated, but it's not. Basically, they added a lot of electric stuff to the engine for emission purposes. You take all the electric stuff off and you're left with an original K-Jet fuel injection mechanical system, which works perfectly fine. But the minute you add the little electric components in, that's when you could start having some crazy gremlin issues, which is basically what my idle issue turned out to be. So the electric stuff on the fuel injection system, you have a micro switch here, and this tells the computer when your throttle is off of idle. You can hear it click there. And then you have a wide open throttle switch right here. This basically enriches the system when you're at wide open throttle. You have a cold start fuel injector here, and you have an idle air control motor here. This regulates your idle once up to operating temperature. And somewhere down there you have a oxygen sensor. This is a control pressure regulator or something like that. And then this is the brain and everything, and this is the fuel distribution system of the engine. You have I think it's the timer switch right there, which basically tells when the cold injector, when to come on and when not. And the most important part is the fuel frequency valve. What is the frequency valve? It's basically a fuel injector that the computer uses to basically keep everything of the engine balanced. Now, AJ and a lot of people also thought that it was a binding accelerator cable. They're very common for binding up, and mine had a lot of rust on one of the ends to it. It's also a possibility that the linkage that links the throttle spool to the butterflies, they get gummed up and gunked up and stuff, and they also bind, which would explain why when you bump the throttle, it would start running perfectly fine. But after cleaning all that, it's still, 4 days later, it just didn't make any sense. And then I tried messing with the fuel to ratio mixture here, which is, you gotta have the correct tools to do it. The correct tool on a DeLorean is a dwell meter. A dwell meter is this saving grace. This basically hooks up to a connector right over here. And once hooked up to the engine, it tells you how often the frequency valve is operating. Why is that important? Because that tells you what the oxygen sensor is basically detecting in the engine, and then you can get a better idea of what's going on. So this is what I'm talking about. This is the secondary throttle right here. If I just gradually give it gas, that's my idle. And it just has like a little stumble to it. Now if I snap the throttle, and it doesn't change whatsoever with this. All this is adjusted correctly. There's no bindage in here whatsoever. Now if I snap the throttle, it literally goes back to open loop, or the first throttle. It just makes no sense. I got all the accessories on, plus the AC going. And see, there goes the frequency injector going full blast. But this did that. Hold on. There we go. All right, so I just adjusted the curb idle screw just a teensy bit to bring it up to about 900. All right, what's causing the stumbling part? Only does it when she's hot. So when you first start up the Delorean with the dwell meter, basically what you're looking for is the meter should swing to 20, give or take a little, when it's cold and the computer is in open loop. Basically, the frequency ejector is at that set figure until the oxygen sensor warms up. Once the oxygen sensor warms up, then the engine goes into closed loop. This dial, this meter here, should swing between 15 and 20. And it's basically the frequency injector just putting a little fuel in. Once the oxygen sensor reads it, and it just regulates between 15 and 20. If it's off at all, then that's when you can adjust your fuel to ratio mixture on the fuel distributor to put it into the correct pattern. Now what you'll see on my car in just a second here is it will start up. When I first started up, it is it's at that 20 range, and then when it goes into closed loop, it swings all the way over to 33. Okay, so with it in closed loop, it's going to 33. All right, so she swings all the way over, right? I think what's wrong is she's too rich. So watch this. There's a frequency injector. There we go. So there's that idle screwing up again. Huh. What in the world? Four days of fumbling through this thing, trying to fix this idling issue. Once I hooked up the dwell meter, it all made sense, and I found the problem. All right, I'm troubleshooting this as we go. So watch what happens when I gradually give it throttle. Starts running like crap, right? What did I say it sounded like? I said it sounded like somebody just screwed with the stinking timing. Come back here and I unplug the distributor advance, and poof, it idles perfectly. I think, and I've got to check it, I think what's wrong is the hoses are on the wrong end of the valve. I'm going to check that here in a second to confirm that, but that's why it was screwed up. Now I'm going to go change the hose routing on that valve, and I think that's the problem. And there you go, folks. That's why she wouldn't run correctly. The vacuum lines were switched. The middle hose was going to the distributor, and the side hose was going to the thermal thing. Basically, when you would give it gradual throttle, it would then create a vacuum on the advance and would keep it vacuum advanced when it went back to idle. When you snap the throttle, then it would release it. Now it runs perfect. So after driving the DeLorean for about 2,000 miles ever since part 5, since it was originally all the other stuff fixed, what happens? Of course, we have a pinhole leak that happens in the radiator. And it wasn't really that bad, but the only problem is, well, wait a second, a radiator in a DeLorean is pretty easy to replace, right? No, not exactly. The correct way to replace the radiator in a DeLorean is you've got to discharge the AC system. The condenser and the radiator have to come out and as a unit. Sometimes you got to remove the lower end air dam and stuff. You've got to take down the sway bar and stuff. If you've got the fans, it's a big hassle. And at the same time, one of the things that was bothering me is, now AJ fixed the frame issue that was right under the master cylinder, but the gas tank plate, the front frame area still had issues that needed to be addressed. And the only way to get those areas correctly addressed is basically disassemble everything on the front and just start taking all that junk and gunk off. Basically, we had two things. Number one, the car sat under a carport covered up in the southern area of Mississippi, not near the ocean, but still in a salt air environment. And the frame wasn't rusted out, but it just had surface rust and crud and crap all over it. Now, originally in part 1, Russell from that detail guy, he got some of that stuff out, but it was never done the correct way. So I called up AJ and I said, hey, listen, I know this is crazy. I'm gonna send the car back to you. It's time to let's go ahead and do the radiator. I know you've got to take the AC system and discharge it again, but this time it will allow you to get the entire frame. So my car had sort of a hot start issue after the fuel lines were replaced. The new fuel lines are incredible. They work perfect, but they don't have that big thick insulation that the original factory fuel lines had. On a DeLorean, now you can go on YouTube and see a bazillion cold start videos on a DeLorean. That's all fine and dandy. Most of the times a DeLorean will cold start. It's the hot start issues that DeLoreans are known for. And basically, there's a lot of heat inside the engine compartment, the fuel lines getting heated up, fuel evaporation and all that, vapor lock. The fuel accumulator on a DeLorean is basically a balloon inside a fuel filter housing. And once you shut the car off, or while it's running, it's always pressurized up. When you shut the ignition off and let the car sit, then if there's any vapor lock or fuel evaporation from the heat, then that balloon inside that fuel accumulator can continue the pressure on the fuel system. So when you go to start it back up, it'll do it. So on my DeLorean, there was a few things that could contribute to the hot start issue. Number one, we knew the fuel accumulator needed to be replaced. Number two, also there is a small little control valve inside the fuel distribution system on top of the engine that has a couple of tiny little O-rings in them, and if those O-rings fail, it will basically bleed the fuel pressure down and you'll have a hot start issue. I did order some new O-rings for that. I replaced it, didn't make a difference at all. But another thing that I found interesting doing a ton of research is they now offer a inline fuel check valve for the fuel line. And basically, when the fuel pump assembly unit, the retrofit or the new updated fuel pump assembly was offered through DeLorean in Texas back in 2012, they had a problem with the inline or the integrated check valve assembly on the fuel pump assembly failing after a very short amount of time. This would allow fuel pressure to bleed back into the fuel tank from the fuel system, and you would have a hot start issue. So I went ahead and ordered one offline and installed my own inline check valve assembly, and then plus with the new fuel accumulator, it's all completely cured now. It looks great. And as you can see in the pictures here in the video, AJ did an incredible job replacing the fuel accumulator. It looks incredible in there. And this next picture I'll show you of my old fuel accumulator and the new one. You can check, there's a huge size difference, which I like. But the nut that was on the end of the fuel line, it cracked. It cracked over stress over time and stuff. So AJ put new fittings, new hoses, the entire fuel accumulator assembly, and all that is brand new. Also, I was at it because of the stress that was on the starter motor that was replaced during the restoration in 2012. Because of all the fuel pump issues originally in like part 1 and part 2, I went ahead and had AJ replace the starter motor with a brand new, or it's basically a brand new starter motor from AutoZone, replacing the one that came from DMC Texas, as you can see here in the pictures as well. This really made a nice little difference. And here is the frame now underneath my car. Look at that. He also refinished the sway bar and put brand new sway bar bushings. That looks amazing. You can kind of see the radiator from here. With also, again, the frame now refinished. One of the things I had AJ kind of refinished was the bracket for the resistor, the light switch for the engine compartment, and the relay and stuff. I had him take that off, refinish it, repaint it, and that looks so much better. AJ also refinished these plastic louvers on the side. I love the look of that. He also put a spring on the engine lid cover. Now, when you hit the release button, this pops up. So it's a one-step system with opening the engine compartment cover. Again, here is the louver on the passenger side. It looks absolutely gorgeous. Now, one of the things y'all haven't seen yet, I don't know if I've showed it in any of my videos, I did find one of the cameras. It's one of the JVC cameras. That's what Marty used in the Back to the Future video, part 1. I did a major detail too. I don't know if y'all can see how clean this interior looks, but it came out, even though the car was already clean. And let me go to the other side and show you the controller. I ordered a Futaba remote from Doc's Prop Shop. Quite expensive, but I tell you what, this thing is so cool. Yes, all that works. So I have that set up on the back deck area of the interior. A lot of people come up, hey, can we look at your car? They love the flux capacitor, the hoverboard, the save the clock tower, now the camera, now the controller. And it has a lot of sound effects and stuff. It's really, really cool. While I was at it from the last video, I also changed this out. Now, there was nothing wrong with the old one, but it was split right here. It didn't fit correctly. And there was a good possibility it just wasn't bolted in correctly, but I went ahead and got a new one of these from Delorean Go, and that is fixed. And also put some new rubber pads on the clutch, brake, and accelerator pedal.